you check the children?
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes that is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Bienvenidos, Fright fans, and welcome to the horror show. I'm Jaime and Fuego, and so very stoked to be back doing another solo review, and this is for one that just came out on Shudder about a week, previous to me actually filming this, but it got some attention on the festival circuit, hence, Shudder wanting to put it out on their streaming service because they are in a lot of ways, the premier streamer for horror, but this is entitled The Surrender. No, we're not going to go into that and get demonetized or anything, but this has a very noteworty face in it, at least for me. I know her from The Boys. That's probably where a lot of people know her from, but Colby Minifie? I often get her confused with Marin Ireland, because they have this very similar, like gorgeous reddish hair, but also kind of like an edge about their performances. And especially with the subject matter of this one, it's no exception that this is a very just hard-hitting rumination on grief. Although I will say, as we always start out with overall thoughts on this, it's not particularly breaking tons of new ground with the themes of, just not wanting to let a loved one go, whether it's a family member, as it is in this case, or, friends or whatever else. And, it's a theme that's been explored extensively over just, popular culture, especially as far as on the spooky side of things go, for years and years at this point. I mean, boy, Monkey's Paw is definitely one of the earliest as far as, long before Pet Sematary did it, or another one that this one could be compared to, I think, and much more so directly, A Dark Song, which is a terrific one that Cecil and I reviewed on this channel many years ago after we saw it right out of the International Horror and Sci-Fi Film Festival. But yeah, so The Surrender is more so than anything focusing on the familial dynamic of the grief, and I think especially that and the really solid performances from I just want to keep looking back at her name, Colby, and now I'm thinking Colby Smolder. No, not to get them confused or anything, drastically different actresses there, but Colby's character and the dynamic with her mother, it has the horror elements, and they come, not really hard and heavy until the third act, and this is a non-spoiler, so I'm not going to really give away tons more than what is shown in the trailer and, described on like the synopsis on, IMDb and whatnot. But it does focus very heavily on just not just the grieving between the mother and, Colby's character, the daughter, and their dynamic of butting heads with one another about how to proceed, whether to actually go through with what the mom wants to do, which is, bring someone back. Yeah, there's a lot of films that people are talking about recently about, bringing the dead back and stuff, but it's a very common theme and even trope, in horror and stuff like that. But it does, especially with some flashbacks that it employs, that I felt were like incredibly poignant. Bits where Colby's character is back as a daughter and interacting with her father, and it just really solidifies the love between the two of them. But then you also have the curtain pulled back a little bit further, and you see some of the parental friction, I guess, that was going down in those earlier years that Colby's character as a little girl was really pretty much unaware of. And so, yeah, I enjoyed this. I genuinely did. And while it's not breaking tons of new ground or anything of that nature, especially with where it goes, I thought the ending was, pretty effective without getting into spoilers there or anything of that nature. So even though it is kind of mining familiar territory, it did it, with solid production values, and, despite being a one-location film and, a very small cast, it was just very effective, at least in my estimation. And so, the movie starts out with Colby's character. She is back home, excuse me, after a time in New York, apparently, as you find out a little bit later, without, like, major amounts of detail into it. But she's back home because of the fact that her father he's terminal at this particular point. There's indications it's cancer. And so, she's butting heads with her mom about, hey, you should have come back earlier, and so on and so forth. And so there is, like, the horror is reined in for good chunks of this, and it does focus on that drama that I had mentioned. And so, the father does die, and then it turns into the mother exploring even just deeper ideas about stuff that she was already doing, trying to prolong his life and, you know, avoid his demise. You know, she was looking into everything from what Colby's character described Megan, I believe, is her character, as like, you know, voodoo, witch doctor craziness and all this other stuff. And she's consulted, you know, mystics, and, you know, like she's gotten into crystals, like all these different things that, you know, she was already doing, the mother being, to try to prolong the life of the terminal husband. And then when he finally dies, that's where she goes full frickin' niner, man. And she's like, okay, I have spoken to somebody who has gotten me in touch with a man who can come and help us bring your father back. And so the daughter, Colby's character, is totally averse to it initially, and she's grieving with the aforementioned flashbacks. And there's one really effective one, I believe it's the first one in the film, where she discovers, I believe it's a dead bird, and so she's talking with her dad about it, about how, you know, everyone eventually dies, and she's like, do even humans die? Do people die? Are you and mom gonna die? You know, and it's a very effective scene. And then just some of the other flashbacks, as I mentioned, get more into the other stuff that was going on within the family dynamic. But it's a very poignant scene that they come back to a few times, because it shows that, you know, just tempting that fate of trying to bring, you know, somebody back. And I know that new film from the A24 Talk to Me guys is really making the rounds, as far as, you know, perhaps exploring some of these disturbing sort of topics and whatever. But, you know, this one did it in a very impactful, dramatic bit, as I mentioned, without getting into too much. And they do in a very similar fashion to this dark song, to A Dark Song, great Irish film I mentioned earlier. They do end up consulting someone, and person does come, and that's it about the midpoint of the film, and that's all that I'm going to say. But yeah, these things often do not go well, whether, you know, like in Pet Sematary, coming back different, or, you know, whatever. I'm not going to get into super spoilers or anything of that nature, but that is perhaps one of the few things within this film, is that it does veer into that essence of predictability in that particular point, because we've seen this this sort of path taken by a lot of overzealous characters many times previously in other pieces of art, you know, films and television and whatever. But it's where I have to veer into the acting once more. Colby's character, she is the focal point, but her mother, that she was saying, much older actress, you know, because both, you know, parents are like, I'd say like late 60s, maybe early 70s, somewhere in that age range, where mom is still very like sharp and with it, albeit, you know, veering into this delusionality of whether she can actually have her husband back. And, you know, there's a few interesting bits in some of this discussion about family, where recalling certain things a little bit differently, and the arguments and the debate between, you know, mother and daughter are just so effective and so believable. The two have terrific chemistry together. And also when you see some of these bits where Colby's father, or the, I guess, specter, the spirit of him, is kind of appearing to her in dreams and stuff like that, almost advising Colby's character Megan about, okay, don't argue with your mother, you know it's not going to end well if you're arguing with your mom. You have to, you know, at least try to meet her in the middle and give this wacky, you know, tactic that she is wanting to employ a chance, or else it's just going to turn into a bigger fight between the two of them. So you could tell that growing up, and then even into adulthood, she was a daddy's girl, you know, and so she's still, you know, even in the death of dad, is still bickering with mom. And so, you know, you see the torture of both characters and how they're both processing grief differently, but, you know, both of them are enough of a shade of gray where, you know, you just kind of believe both of their approaches and how they would kind of, I don't know, just people deal differently, man. You know, that's the big thing. And so both their performances are great. The one that I was a little less on was when this dude shows up to assist with what they're attempting to do, without, you know, veering into third act spoilers, as I mentioned. And so he's seemingly like ESL, seems like, you know, somewhere from Europe or whatever, but, you know, big bearded dude. I thought he was a different actor, and then I realized he was not, so I'm not going to go too much into him. But, you know, very stoic and very silent, you know, speaking in a foreign language, and utters a few bits of English, you know, here and there, protection and stuff like that, you know. But yeah, aside from that, he was the weakest link, because this is just a very compellingly female-driven narrative. And as I think about it now, I don't think there's any other actor in this movie besides the three of them. So keeping the budget low, but still, as I shift into production values and stuff, still looking really good, especially where the reason I keep making a Dark Song comparison is because we're talking about, the candles and, making the circle. And I've seen in my years of, reviews, whether it's solo or with Cecil or, some of the other compadres here on the team, yeah, we've seen a lot of these films of trying to bring loved ones back. And, a lot of them, we got to make the salt circle, or we have to, have all of these candles to, protect us from what could appear on the exteriors and things like that. But, well put together, just not just an assortment of different types of candles, but the lighting around the room, especially as this, like, I guess, ritual seance, whatever you want to properly describe it as. The term, as far as being clear cut to me, isn't quite sticking out 100% because, different films or stories, describe it with, different terms and whatever. But, the lighting is terrific in this, especially as things are starting to change within the room, and the dynamic is getting a little tenser and a little bit crazier. So production values, despite being one location, as a lot of these films tend to be, still really, really good, man. And you do get some blood eventually, without getting into too many spoilers. But there is some. So the title, of this, once again, veering back into being the surrender. So the title refers to something that must be surrendered, and there's 3 stages of surrender. And I guess I should have probably mentioned that during the trailer, during the story discussion. But that's what the title refers to, is how loved ones must surrender something, whether it's tears or other things, So we do get some gore later on in this film, and also some pretty good makeup work too. There are things that are seen as, that tension is ramped up that I mentioned, and that there's going to be, or you can probably assume that there's going to be an otherworldly presence, whether it's those who have departed or perhaps something more sinister. So yeah, I was impressed with the effects in this too. I can definitely see why Shudder wanted to acquire this, have it on their streaming service and everything. Music isn't really too much of a bit to point out, although there is a song, Sitting Around Thinking of You, and if you've only experienced loneliness, I'm talking these lyrics verbatim, then you know what it is to just, long for the presence of somebody else that you love. And it's kind of a folky-ish, old-timery type song, although I don't know if it's a new tune that was just trying to mimic an older sort of sound and stuff. But it is effective in this dynamic of an imperfect family love. There's a great bit, as I'm wrapping this up, that I was just reminded of, that the mother speaks when she's talking about, the selective recollection of Colby's character, her daughter. And she's like, yeah, well, she says to her mom, she's like, yeah, well, I don't remember, having to quit dance classes that same way, and blah, blah, blah. And then she's like, yeah, your father saved, his worst parts for me. People tend to do that with their spouses. And then she's like, well, why didn't you just leave him? And then mom's like, well, because he also saved the best parts for me. And I thought that was a really poignant moment, a really, really good bit of dialogue. Kind of reminded me of some things that Stephen King has said with regards to, him and Tabby as he's gotten older. And it's like, yeah, it's very much that warts and all, which is what I like to describe, my idea of not necessarily the fleeting aspects of romantic love, but definitely the dedication of long-term love, whether in something like a marriage, because of the fact that it is a marathon, not a sprint, and you have to really just weigh out those worst moments and those best moments. And if I don't know, if the juggling act is working, that's typically why, especially when there's a child involved, because there's flashbacks to parents fighting pretty decently in this and stuff. But long story short, guys, just to just wrap back to it, this is a definite recommend for me, despite the familiarity of some of the things that they do. I was actually quite a fan of the surrender, and most notably, Colby, she's involved with Vought on The Boys, and at least the first few seasons. I can't remember if her character ends up getting offed in one of these later ones or not, but yeah, she's doing something a little bit different than kind of the slight snark, bitchy corporate woman that she was playing, working with Homelander and some of the other stuff. So she's compelling in this. The mom is as well. The few scenes that we get with the father, when he's actually able to talk in these almost like dream type sequences with his daughter, those have a really endearing sweetness to them as well. So yeah, guys, if you are a subscriber to Shudder, or if you have AMC Plus, you actually get Shudder included for free with that, so that's where I watched it. But yeah, guys, that is my thoughts once more on the newest release from Shudder entitled The Surrender. So yeah, guys, I extend the grande gracias. I've been Jaime and Fuego. You can find more on all social media sectors: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Threads, all that silliness. But most importantly is for you to jump on here if you've seen this film. Give your thoughts. Was it too derivative? Did it break enough new ground? Were the performances compelling enough to make it stand out for you? So if you've seen it, share your thoughts. If you haven't, you know, hey, just give a like, you know, share. And if you haven't subscribed, please do that as well. So once again, I've been Fuego. Y'all have been Rad Status. And until next time, right, fans, remember, stay scared.